Ngā mihi kia koutou. Aio ki te rangi, aio ki te whenua, aio ki ngā mea katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome. We have many participants from across Asia and New Zealand today, so thank you for tuning in. Joining me in studio today from Panama and the US. First up is Alex Worker, a New Zealander with an international background in food startups, agriculture in the Asia Pacific. After several years at Fonterra in China, working for international farming and also managing the Fonterra Starbucks global account, he's moved into the alternative protein space, consulting with Impossible Foods and other clients. He's the managing director of High Ground Brands, a strategic food and beverage agency supporting companies with their expansion into Greater China and APAC. Alex is also a long-serving member of the Asia New Zealand Foundation Leadership Network. And we also have Gerald Queck with us. Currently, he's based in the US and is the founder of Addiction Pet Foods, one of the fastest growing pet food companies in the world and New Zealand's largest dry pet food plant, exporting to 15 international markets, including across Asia. Addiction produces award-winning dog and cat foods and treats using New Zealand lamb, chicken, beef, duck, turkey and venison. Addiction's headquarters are in Singapore, but it produces the majority of its products into Phuket in the Bay of Plenty. Gerald travelled to New Zealand in 2012 with the support of the foundation and has been an active supporter of the facilitator of the foundation's entrepreneurship program ever since. This session is brought to you by the Asia New Zealand Foundation, Te Whito Tūhono. The foundation is New Zealand's leading authority on Asia and provides experiences and resources to help New Zealanders build their knowledge, skills and confidence to thrive in Asia. I have been a lucky recipient of many of these opportunities through the foundation, which have spanned across agribusiness, sustainability initiatives, leadership and even offshore opportunities. The foundation also runs the ASEAN Young Business Leaders Initiative. This program is an interconnected network of entrepreneurs across New Zealand and Asia. Our guests today, Alex and Gerald, are both members of this entrepreneurship program, with Gerald visiting New Zealand in 2012 and Alex visiting Indonesia in 2016. So first up, Alex, learning from the culinary experience that you have drawn from Fonterra, Hatchery, Starbucks, High Ground, how's China's palate changing over the last decade? And what new food and beverage trends are you seeing?
Thanks, Margie. Look, China is arguably the most dynamic civilization in terms of food and beverage trends today. But it's important as well not to say it's just a China story for New Zealand. If you're looking at APAC, again, you've got different regions and a lot of different countries and cultures under that umbrella. And before I can give a couple of case studies, I think, if we're looking at it from our New Zealand perspective, it's very easy to sit in New Zealand and talk about consumers, miles away and expect to export your food and that to land on a doorstep and to be enjoyed. And I think that was very much the case 15, 20 years ago. But nowadays, things are changing so quickly, whether it's food and beverage trends, insights, changing needs. And so really now it's all about understanding the demand. Whether that's in Shanghai, in Chengdu, in Manila, Seoul, you've got all these different cities now. And I think the emphasis needs to be on cities that are shaping the trends around demand. And I think for, whether a farmer back in New Zealand or a processor or a marketer or an end retailer or an online retailer, together we need to be really clear about what that demand is, what it looks like, how it's going to change, and then, working back from the cities, what that means for us back in New Zealand. So in the last few years, some of the fascinating trends for me have been around beverage solutions. Previously, I used to see Tokyo and Seoul being incubators for the region in terms of the latest coffee or tea macchiato or ice bubble trend. But nowadays, a lot of that's actually coming straight from Shanghai. And you're seeing companies developing chef-led applications, even in the case of Starbucks, building their own incubators, what they call a roastery, a premium experience center, and they've got one in Shanghai, where they test new ideas and they see if those ideas respond well in front of their consumers and target audiences. And if they're working well, they double down on those ideas. The bad ones they let go very quickly, and the good ones they put capital and resources behind, and then they're taking a lift and shift approach, where you take a good idea from Shanghai, quickly test it in your network in Seoul, and then you can start building up, a wider strategy. So beverage solutions have been a fascinating one, and I think there's a great story there for New Zealand, both in traditional agriculture, but also emerging alternative proteins. And I think a key one to call out in the COVID-19 and post world is very much around immunity and wellness. And we're seeing that both with honey and solutions tailored around wellness, but also a bunch of other ingredients, and even looking at lifestyle and skincare products.
Neat. Thank you for that, Alex. Gerald, I just have a question for you. You've seen astronomical increases in the demand of complete nutrition pet food across China and Asia in general. How's that changed in the face of COVID? Has that increased demand? People have got more time to really look into these things, or has it actually decreased the demand, lessened it due to COVID?
Well, we saw a sudden stop of orders at the beginning of this year when COVID first struck. I think there was a lot of anxiety and worries in the pet food space when COVID first struck. And what we saw was during the lockdown, as the countries announced the lockdowns, a lot of pet owners got quite nervous and anxious, and they started hoarding a lot of pet food. So we saw a spike in demand just before the beginning of the lockdown. Subsequently, we have now seen normal ordering patterns from different countries, but each country is quite different. They are quite different in their journey, COVID journey. So some companies are beginning to reopen. Some countries are beginning to start their next phase of lockdowns. So each country has a very different COVID journey, and I think each country is kind of grappling with the situation quite differently. What we do expect is that more and more pet owners are going to be more value-oriented and more value-conscious. So more pet owners are going to be concerned about how much they're going to spend on their dog and cat. They will be looking for good value, for ensuring that they get the best bang for their buck. Apart from buying products from traditional offline retail channels, I think more pet owners are also going to buy product from the traditional supermarket, grocery stores, as well as buy product from online, obviously. So we see a huge increase in sales, boost in sales when it comes to online shopping for pet owners.
No, I completely understand that. Alex, I've got more of an agricultural meat one for you. New Zealand's exports to China last year grew to $1.7 billion. How do you expect the changes with everything that's happening globally and the growing demand of plant alternatives for meat to influence our exports? And how do you see the wider New Zealand agricultural sector adapting to these changes?
Great question. I think there's a really good opportunity still for the New Zealand meat industry with exports into China and greater APAC. The fundamentals are strong, right? You've got rising middle class, people, again, being more price conscious in areas, but not trading down for important family or household goods. And I think meat and proteins are seen very much, at the center of the dining table. But at the same time, I think if you're really going to be honest about the New Zealand marketing story around its meat products in China, there's a lot left, or there's a lot more required to really articulate why you would choose New Zealand over a grass-fed piece of meat from Uruguay, Argentina, or even grain-fed from Australia for that matter. And so I think if you're really looking and boiling that down, what I think we've been doing into China, particularly with meat still, is using that export commodity lens to using it as a large marketplace where we can push or dump a lot of our product, or recently relying on strategic partners that control a lot more of the value chain and end up doing, we export full carcass, the partners will take full carcass into their processing plant and then spin off a variety of goods. And a lot of our meats will end up, of course, going into as hot pot solutions in the very popular Chinese food service channel. Now, if you're looking at plant-based, and there's a lot of noise growing around whether it's Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, or a lot of other players, even in seafood alternatives and other industries. There's a lot of capital and a lot of now consumer interest coming out of the US, but now across APAC and recently now in China. And I don't think that's going to slow down. So I think, it's a really, really important window for the New Zealand meat industry. And I know beef and lamb are starting to step up in terms of their marketing story, particularly around grass-fed. But we have to very quickly decide where we want to play. And if we are up at the top of the pyramid and fighting in the premium space, really understand why consumers will pay a premium for New Zealand versus Uruguay or elsewhere. And then also we have to be very careful of the plant-based emerging developments where there's a very clear mandate to go after the commodity section of the meat aisle. And I think this is both very exciting, where technology will disrupt a traditional industry and fundamentally allow us to use the planet's resources in a lot more efficient and effective manners. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of disruption. So if New Zealand commodities are going to sit in the commodity section of the pyramid, our exporters need to expect to face a lot more competition in coming years from plant-based alternatives that once volumes getting moving and the export or the growth strategies behind border are moving in places like China, India, the United States, they're going to be going after that larger pie, and New Zealand has to respond.
Absolutely. I know that there's a lot that we're trying to do in New Zealand to really respond to that and do it quickly. Gerald, on that note, regulatory compliance in New Zealand is changing rapidly. We've got the desire for an improved water quality. We've got nutrient budgeting. We have reducing nitrogen losses on farm. Now, these are massive changes that the whole agricultural industry are undergoing at the moment. How do you see these changes affecting your business moving forward, especially with the increased demand for natural and complete pet food solutions?
Well, I can imagine it must be quite challenging for farmers to navigate through these changing requirements and regulations. But I think on the positive side, I think the sustainability story is so critical in presenting a premium pet food, a premium brand or meat brand positioning for international markets. More and more of our customers are asking for sustainable sourcing of ingredients. And in fact, we were one of the first companies to actually launch a brushtail product. So brushtail possum, as you know, is a big pest in New Zealand. That's what actually brought us to New Zealand because the brushtail was a huge pest, and we decided to turn it into a pet food. So we wanted first to create a pet food made of the brushtail possum, and that really resonated in a dramatic way to our customers. So I think similarly, you'll find the same thing with pet owners looking for meat ingredients and raw materials that are wholesome, sustainable, high quality, and as much as these compliance regulations may pose quite challenging for farmers, I think it's a great opportunity to highlight and accentuate the story around sustainability and quality. Having said that, we're always concerned about supply chain, ensuring that there's enough raw materials and ingredients at the right price, at a competitive price, so that we can compete in the pet food space. And we are competing with the likes of the multinationals in the US and Canada with lots of different raw material subsidies, with a huge amount of supply, no constraints around supply. And they are able to offer raw materials that are much lower cost than what you find in New Zealand and in the region. And as a result, they are in a unique position to not only just tackle and compete at the super premium category, but also in a more mass market and premium affordable category. And if we as New Zealand companies want to scale, we need to be able to compete at more than just more than just the ultra premium segment, but also in a kind of a middle of the pyramid or the top part of the pyramid. So I think we've got to be conscious and balance that with availability of raw materials at an affordable price for pet owners around the world.
Absolutely. Alex, just on that note, what are your thoughts around plant-based meat alternatives in pet food?
There's a fantastic opportunity in pet food. There's already some companies that are getting a lot of attention, both at a consumer and investor level, out of the west coast of the US at the moment. I'm sure Gerald might be tracking them quite closely. But whether it's at a soy protein concentrate base or you're using peas, depending on what you can secure. And I think it's really looking at that sustainable footprint. As well as cost advantages to what you can secure your inputs at, and then where you can manufacture it. I think there's a great opportunity for New Zealand, again leveraging what we do so well: food safety, walking the talk around our supply chain, taking what we do best from farm, and without a lot of hands touching that product, getting it into our consumers' hands. In these mega cities around Asia, there's a great New Zealand platform there, and I think we're going to see the most creative and also the most innovative companies really drive some of these traditional and new sectors, leveraging the base that New Zealand provides, but also coming up with new designs, new solutions, and trying things. And if they don't work, that's okay, as long as you don't spend too much time or money on them. And the good ideas we should be sharing across our sectors and our industries, and really putting them up on a pedestal and saying, this is working in Manila, or this is working in Tokyo. Come join us and try or do similar.
Absolutely. Innovation. And we've got a lot of resources that can help us in that sector. So absolutely. Okay, so I have a question that I want to ask both of you. I'll start with Gerald. How do you deal with the abundance of fake information surrounding food and in particular pet food? So I know that you've spoken in the past about the misinformation when it comes to dissolvable kibble, and how do you mitigate things like that when it directly impacts your business?
So unfortunately, there's a great deal of misinformation in the market, often created by pet food companies themselves as a way to differentiate themselves from their competitors. And this really adds a great deal of confusion to pet owners because they hear different things, often contradictory, and they are kind of finding it very difficult to make the right decision for their dog and cat. Our principle has always been quite simple. We always look to science for answers, and we look for creating pet foods that are using natural ingredients, gently and minimally processed, and we test them regularly to ensure that we meet all the standards for a complete and balanced dog and cat food. And of course, we have animal nutritionists in our team who are constantly formulating foods that actually ensure that dogs do well and thrive, and not just they thrive on our products as well. I think that the challenge also can be mitigated, and we do a lot of education with pet owners. We do seminars about how pet food is actually made, the source of the ingredients, where they come from, and again, the whole story of provenance around New Zealand ingredients. We want to provide greater insight into how animals are raised, how the vegetable ingredients are raised in New Zealand, and give really good insight to our customers on how these ingredients are actually farmed. And I think that generates a great deal of authenticity around our brand and our story, transparency and honesty for our customers, and we want to try to continue doing that. Apart from the seminars, we also we have lots of blog articles which we launch on a regular basis on topics that are quite technical about taurine in dog and cat food, the importance of them, to general pet care information. So it's a constant effort to educate our customers, providing them with science-based information, with the right research and transparency to our process and our sourcing.
That education component of all of that in your branding, that must take a lot of time and resources as well for you to try and mitigate the misinformation.
Yeah.
What about you, Alex? In terms of misinformation in the food industry, it's rife. I mean, we both know that. How do you deal with that in your industry?
I'm just going to pick up on a point that Gerald made. I love that point around authenticity. And I'll give you a quick example of, we used to help wine growers from New Zealand up in Beijing that would show up on the doorstep with their fantastic produce and wine from New Zealand in their swanderai. And again, in New Zealand, that's a mark of a great producer, right? You walk the talk, your hands show all the work that you do, and you sit there, stand behind your product, let the product speak for itself. That didn't really work as well in Beijing, where the local distributor was actually asking the winemaker, please, instead of the swanderai, next time wear a tuxedo or a suit. And our winemaker was a little bit put out because, again, it felt unauthentic to him. But really, it was the understanding that in New Zealand, we stand behind our products because we understand the values that go into them. Still, in so many different cities and parts of Asia, the education process is required to help that consumer who you are trying to help understand around all the work that you've done around your product, that they see you as being authentic. And so in the case of Beijing, if you're selling a premium wine, you have to also deliver an experience, even as a winemaker, to help serve their needs, which might be wearing a suit, even if it's slightly uncomfortable for you the first time, to help them understand that this is a premium experience that they're buying into. Now, I think there's like an evolution on that story, because you might do that the first time and the winemaker, but the second or the third or the fourth time, once you're building the trust with that consumer and the distributor that the product's excellent and it comes from New Zealand, then it's really how do you invite them back to New Zealand. And I think with COVID, it's a lot harder for them to jump on an airplane. But I think this is where we're seeing great work by Tourism New Zealand, Air New Zealand, working very closely with our F&B and agribusiness sectors to really help tell that New Zealand story, to educate, but also to do it in a really authentic way, so that consumer, across APAC, understands why New Zealand, or why you might buy Gerald's pet food. But equally, you're getting a story that's backed up by our government in terms of food safety and the systems that go behind that. And then I think there's this magic part, which I think we're seeing, develop in a number of our sectors, including dairy, including the emerging plant-based space, where you're trialing things, working very closely with channel partners, whether it's Alibaba, Jingdong, Lazada, and they, these channel partners, the ones that sell your product, know their consumer better than anybody. They have the data to prove that. And so now there's this fantastic opportunity where we can actually invite farmers from New Zealand to work directly with the channels that serve these consumers. And you're almost building up these new collectives or cooperatives where you have, New Zealand farmers on one side, you have a distributor or ideally the channel partner, and e-commerce is a great example on the other side. And then they also invite, your consumer into the room. So the 3 or 4 of you across the value chain are all learning together, what new product's working, and what story out of New Zealand resonates best.
Thanks. Do you think that that's something that's quite time consuming in terms of, you spoke earlier about Uruguay and the meat that's coming out, and the premiumisation of our products comparatively. What is the timeline that you see that all working for us as New Zealanders or as exporters?
I actually genuinely think we do it quite quickly, right? It's, using the words like agile or hustle or being demand-led. And I think the key is, the Uruguayans have really built up this grass-fed meat brand in 5 or 6 years, where it's a lot of children of these Uruguayan farmers, with the support of the Uruguayan Meat Export Association, that have actually been sent or travelled on their own accord into these Asian cities, armed with good beef and good wine, and really marketed that story on behalf. And it's quite a legacy back to the New Zealand Dairy Board back in the day, where we were blocked out of Europe and we went into Asia and we rolled up our sleeves and we did it, hard graft. And I think a little bit of that's required now, but where we've got a lot of ducks aligned back in New Zealand, but we're missing a point at the moment where given this changing dynamic around the power's not in supply, the power now is in channel and who can touch the consumer to understand their needs best. So I think now it's just about how do we be a bit more agile to validate our ideas coming out of New Zealand right on the consumer's doorstep. And it doesn't need to take a long PowerPoint or 12 months of planning necessarily. I'm sure Gerald has some great examples where, develop a product idea, get it into market really quickly, test it with the channel and the consumer. And if it works, then spend a lot more time and money really building it out and taking, insights from one city or one market into the next.
Brilliant. Hey, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to you both, and thank you to everyone who has attended and listened online. Lastly, today's session will be posted on video on demand on their demand section of the Fieldays online website. So for those of you who would like to share or rewatch, you can find it there. Finally, I'd like to close with a whakatauki about hard work and endings. I think this is particularly relevant to today's talk. Te whakaaetanga te whakaaetanga Tēnei te kaupapa kai tēnei te wānanga kai Te mauri o te wānanga ka whakamoia koe ke ronga, apologies, koe ke raro. Haumie hui e tai ki e. Kia ora.